Story 1. The police officer standing in my living room kept repeating the same sentence like he was trying to make sure I understood it. Sir, you were extremely lucky tonight. At the time, I didn't really feel lucky. My hands were still shaking. My heart was racing so hard I could hear it in my ears. The rain outside had finally stopped, but the storm that had been raging all evening still echoed through the quiet woods around my house. I kept staring at the muddy footprints on the floor near my bedroom door. They were not mine, and they definitely weren't there when I went to bed. The officer noticed me looking at them. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. We believe whoever was in your house had been here for quite a while. That was the moment the full weight of the situation hit me. Someone hadn't just broken into my home. Someone had been inside it while I was sleeping. And the worst part is that the first warning sign happened 2 days earlier. But at the time, I didn't realize what it meant. I'm 58 years old, and I live alone outside a small town in eastern Tennessee. My house sits about a mile off the nearest paved road, surrounded by woods and farmland. It's the kind of place people choose when they want quiet. My wife and I moved here almost 20 years ago. She loved the peacefulness. After she passed away 6 years ago, I stayed. I guess the quiet felt familiar. Most evenings follow the same routine. I make dinner, sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, and listen to the woods as the sun goes down. Sometimes you hear owls, sometimes coyotes, sometimes nothing at all. That week a storm system rolled through the region and refused to leave. Heavy rain, wind, thunder. One of those long Appalachian storms that makes the sky look dark even in the middle of the afternoon. The woods change during storms like that. Animals disappear. Everything gets still. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday night. I was sitting in the living room watching an old Western movie when my dog Rusty suddenly lifted his head. Rusty is a 12-year-old lab mix. He's calm, slow, and usually half asleep on the rug most of the evening. But that night he stood up. Slowly. Then he walked toward the back door. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stood there staring through the glass like something outside had caught his attention. At first I didn't think anything of it. Deer wander through the property all the time. But Rusty didn't move. He stood there for almost 5 minutes. Completely still. Eventually I got up and looked outside. The porch light illuminated the rain falling in sheets across the yard. Beyond that was nothing but darkness and trees swaying in the wind. Probably nothing, I said quietly. Rusty finally turned away and laid back down. That was the end of it. Or at least that's what I thought. The next morning I walked outside to grab the newspaper from the box near the driveway. The rain had soaked everything overnight. As I stepped onto the porch, something caught my eye. Mud. A thick streak of it on the wooden boards near the back corner of the porch. At first I assumed it was just from my own boots the night before. But then I looked closer. Boot prints. Not mine. They were larger, and they were facing toward the window beside my bedroom. I stood there for a moment trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had definitely been on my porch, right outside my bedroom window. I told myself it was probably a hunter or someone passing through the woods who had come up to the house looking for help or directions. Still, the situation bothered me enough that I called the sheriff's office. A deputy came by later that afternoon. He looked at the prints, asked a few questions, and then shrugged. Probably just someone wandering through the property, he said. Doesn't look like they tried to get inside. Before leaving, he gave me one piece of advice. Lock your doors tonight. That evening the storm got worse. Thunder rolled across the hills and rain hammered against the roof. Rusty stayed close to me all night. Around midnight I went to bed. Sometime later I woke up suddenly. At first I didn't know why. Then I heard it. A creaking sound. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of sound wooden porch boards make when someone steps on them. My eyes opened wide in the darkness. Another creak. Closer this time. I held my breath. Rusty lifted his head from the foot of the bed. His ears were pointed toward the window. Another step. The porch boards groaned softly under weight. Someone was outside. Right outside my bedroom window. I slowly got out of bed and moved toward the curtain. The rain made everything blurry beyond the glass. I waited, listened. but the footsteps stopped. After a few minutes, I convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe the wind had shifted something on the porch. Eventually, I went back to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. The following day passed quietly. Nothing unusual happened. By evening, I had almost forgotten about the footprints and the strange noises. The storm continued into the night. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again. But this time Rusty was already awake. He was sitting up straight at the end of the bed, staring at the bedroom door. Not barking, just staring. My stomach tightened. Then I heard something. A soft metallic sound. The doorknob, turning. Very slowly. The door moved. Just an inch. A sliver of darkness appeared between the door and the frame. Someone was in the hallway. Inside my house. My heart began pounding. I reached for the baseball bat I keep beside the bed. The door creaked open a little more. I could see a shadow in the hallway. Tall. Standing completely still. For a few seconds nobody moved. Then the shadow shifted. The floorboard in the hallway creaked. The person outside my room took a step closer. Adrenaline surged through me. I suddenly swung the door open and rushed forward with the bat raised. The hallway was empty, but I heard footsteps running downstairs. Fast. The back door slammed open. By the time I reached the kitchen, whoever had been inside was already gone. The rain outside masked the sound of their escape. I grabbed my phone and called 911. 2 deputies arrived about 20 minutes later. They searched the house carefully. That's when one of them called out from the bedroom. "Sir, you need to see this." Mud covered the floor beside my bed. Footprints everywhere. Boot prints. They led from the hallway, all the way to the side of my bed. My stomach turned. The deputy followed the prints across the room. They stopped at the closet. He opened the door. Inside was a backpack. At first glance it looked ordinary. But when the deputy unzipped it, we both stared in disbelief. Inside were supplies, bottled water, gloves, a flashlight, energy bars. Someone had planned to stay inside my house. The deputy turned to me slowly. "Sir, judging by the amount of supplies, whoever this was didn't just break in tonight." He paused. "They may have been hiding here for days." The idea made my skin crawl. Someone had been inside my house, watching, waiting, sleeping somewhere while I went about my normal routine. The deputies searched every room again but found nothing else. No sign of the intruder. No fingerprints. Nothing. They believed the person had escaped into the woods when I confronted them. Before leaving, one of the officers looked back at me and said quietly, "You might want to stay somewhere else for a few nights, just in case." I took his advice. I stayed with my brother for the next week. But what happened 2 days later made the situation even stranger. Another house 3 miles away reported the same thing. Footprints on the porch, outside a bedroom window, and late at night, the sound of someone slowly walking across the boards. The sheriff's department searched the woods but never found anyone. No suspects, no arrests, nothing. To this day, nobody knows who that person was, or how long they had been inside my house. But sometimes when storms roll through the hills and the wind rattles the trees, I still think about those muddy footprints beside my bed, and the realization that somewhere out there, there may be someone who knows my house better than I do. Story 2. The police officer looked up at the attic opening and then back at me. His flashlight was still pointed into the darkness above the hallway ceiling. For several seconds, he didn't say anything. Then he asked a question that I still think about almost every day. "Sir, are you absolutely sure you live here alone?" At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. But after what the officers found in my attic that night, I realized something disturbing. Someone had been living inside my house. And the scariest part is that I had been hearing signs of it for weeks. I just didn't know what they meant. I'm 52 years old and I live in a quiet suburb outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. The neighborhood is calm. Mostly older houses, retired couples, and people who have lived here for decades. My wife passed away 3 years ago. Since then, it's just been me and my routine. I used to work as a warehouse supervisor, but about 6 months ago the company downsized and my position was cut. I had some savings, so I spent most of my time at home applying for jobs online. The days all started to blur together. Coffee, laptop, job listings, applications, waiting. After a while the house started feeling too quiet. At night every little noise stood out. Air vents clicking, pipes shifting, the house settling. About 2 months ago I began noticing something strange. Small things. Things that were easy to dismiss. One morning I walked into the kitchen and saw that one of the cabinet doors was slightly open. I was pretty sure I had closed it the night before, but I figured I must have forgotten. Another day I noticed the back door was unlocked when I was positive I had locked it before going to bed. Again I blamed myself. Memory isn't perfect. Things get overlooked. But then something happened that I couldn't explain. One night I was sitting in the living room watching television when I heard a soft thud upstairs. I froze. The sound had come from the hallway above the living room. At first I assumed it was just the house settling. But then I heard something else. The faint scraping noise, like something sliding slowly across wood. I muted the TV. The sound stopped. I waited. Nothing. After a few minutes I went upstairs to check. Every room was empty. Nothing looked out of place. I convinced myself I had imagined it. But the sounds kept happening. Always late at night. Sometimes a faint creak. Sometimes something shifting. Always upstairs. And always stopping the moment I started moving around the house. At one point I even checked the attic. I climbed the ladder in the garage and lifted the hatch. The attic was dark, dusty, and empty. Just insulation and beams. Nothing unusual. I remember laughing to myself afterward. Getting paranoid, I said. I wish I had trusted my instincts instead. About 3 weeks later I got an email about a security job opening. It seemed perfect. Night shift. Good pay. The email came from someone named Mark Jensen, who said he managed a new storage facility opening on the edge of the city. He wanted to schedule an interview that same evening. The message seemed a little rushed, but I didn't think much about it. Jobs were hard to come by. The address he sent was on the outskirts of town near an industrial area. When I arrived, something immediately felt off. The building looked empty. No lights, no cars, no signs. Just a dark structure sitting in the middle of a large gravel lot. I checked the email again to make sure the address was correct. It was. I called the phone number listed in the message. No answer. I waited about 15 minutes. Still nothing. Eventually I drove home frustrated. The whole thing felt like a waste of time. When I got back to my house, the first thing I noticed was that the front door was slightly open. Just a few inches. My stomach tightened. I was certain I had locked it before leaving. I slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. Everything looked normal. The living room was exactly the way I left it. The kitchen lights were off. Nothing seemed disturbed. I walked through the entire house. Bedroom, bathroom, closets. Nothing missing. Nothing broken. Eventually I convinced myself I must have forgotten to close the door completely. Still, something about the situation bothered me. That night I couldn't sleep well. I kept hearing faint noises upstairs again. Around 3 a.m. I finally got up to investigate. The house was dark and silent. I walked down the hallway toward the spare bedroom. That's when I noticed something strange. The hallway closet door was slightly open. I stopped. I was sure it had been closed earlier. Slowly, I reached out and pulled the door open. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. There were shoes inside. Black boots. Large. Definitely not mine. My heart dropped. Someone else had been inside my house. I backed away slowly and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The operator told me to leave the house immediately and wait outside. I stood in my front yard watching the house. Every shadow in the windows made my heart race. 2 police cars arrived within minutes. The officers entered the house cautiously. One stayed outside with me while the other searched inside. A few minutes later the officer inside shouted something. The one standing beside me looked up toward the roof. "Attic," he said. They brought a ladder and opened the attic hatch in the hallway ceiling. The officer shined his flashlight upward. Then he stepped back. "Come down slowly," he said. For a moment nothing happened. Then I saw movement in the opening. A face appeared. A man climbed down from the attic. He looked filthy. His hair was long and greasy. His clothes were dirty and torn. But the most unsettling thing about him was his expression. He looked calm, almost bored, like being discovered was just an inconvenience. The officers immediately restrained him. They later found out his name was Daniel Carter. And what they discovered in the attic was even more disturbing. The man had been living up there. There were blankets, food wrappers, water bottles, even a small flashlight and phone charger connected to a vent outlet. He had been using the air vents to listen to everything happening in the house. The detective later explained something that made the entire situation even darker. Daniel had been creating fake job listings online. When people responded and sent their resumes, he learned their addresses. Then he scheduled interviews late in the evening. When the person left their home to attend the fake interview, he broke in. Most victims returned before he could do anything. But sometimes, they didn't notice him, and he stayed. The detective believes Daniel had been inside my attic for at least 2 weeks. Possibly longer. 2 weeks. Living above my ceiling. Listening to everything. Watching through the vents. Before leaving that night, one of the officers looked at me and said something quietly. "You're lucky you opened that closet tonight." I asked what he meant. He pointed toward the attic opening. If he'd stayed longer, eventually he would have had to come down. I still live in that house. But sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I still hear faint sounds above the ceiling. And every time it happens, I remember how easily I ignored the signs. And I wonder how many other people might be living in homes where someone else is already there. Story 3. The sheriff standing in my driveway stared at the object in the evidence bag for a long time before speaking. Then he looked at me and said something that made my stomach drop. "Whoever left this has been watching your house for weeks." Inside the bag was a folded piece of paper. It was a map. Not just any map. It was a hand-drawn map of my entire property. Every building, every window, every door. And next to one of the windows there was a small note written in pencil. "Bedroom." At that moment I realized something terrifying. The man who had been outside my house that night hadn't just shown up randomly. He had been planning something. And if I hadn't turned my truck around when I did, I probably would have never known he was there. I live in western Kansas, about 20 minutes outside a small farming town. My house sits on a stretch of flat land surrounded by fields that go on for miles in every direction. No streetlights, no neighbors nearby, just open land, dirt roads, and wind. I moved there after retiring from a trucking company 3 years ago. After decades of driving across the country, the quiet out there felt like a reward. Most nights are peaceful. You hear crickets, wind moving through the fields, sometimes coyotes. But about a month ago something changed. The first strange thing happened late one afternoon. I was sitting on my front porch drinking coffee when I noticed something moving far down the dirt road that leads to my property. At first it looked like a small dark shape cutting through the heat waves rising off the road. Then I heard it. An engine. A dirt bike. That was unusual. Nobody uses that road unless they're coming to my house. The rider kept moving closer. Eventually he reached the entrance to my driveway. Then he stopped. He just sat there, about 200 yards away, watching the house. Even from that distance something about the situation felt wrong. He was wearing a full helmet so I couldn't see his face. After about 30 seconds he turned the bike around and rode away. I assumed he had just mistaken the driveway for a road. Still, the encounter stuck with me. 2 days later I saw the bike again. This time it was near sunset. I was inside the house when I heard the engine outside. When I stepped onto the porch the rider was already halfway down the driveway. Again he stopped. Again he looked toward the house. Then he turned around and left. This time the feeling in my stomach was stronger. Something wasn't right. But there wasn't much I could do about it. Out there people passed through occasionally. Hunters, travelers, farm workers. I told myself I was overthinking things. The next week passed quietly. No sign of the rider. Eventually I forgot about it. Then the storm arrived. It started on a Thursday afternoon and continued into the night. Heavy rain. Thunder rolling across the plains. Wind shaking the windows. Storms out there are loud. So loud that smaller sounds disappear completely. Around 9 p.m., I heard something unusual. An engine. Faint, but recognizable. The dirt bike. I stood up from the couch and walked toward the front window. Through the rain, I could see a small light moving slowly down the road. The bike. The rider was coming back. My stomach tightened. Why would someone ride a dirt bike out here during a storm? The headlight moved closer. Then suddenly it turned off. The bike disappeared into darkness. I waited. Nothing happened. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The engine never started again. That's when the uneasy feeling really started to grow. Where had he gone? There was nowhere else out there except my property. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. Rain hammered against the roof. Wind pushed water sideways across the yard. I shined the flashlight across the driveway. Nothing. No bike. No rider. Just empty land. I went back inside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was nearby. Around midnight I heard the first sound. A faint splash. Then another. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Walking through mud. Right outside the house. My heart started pounding. The footsteps moved along the side of the building. Stopping beneath each window. Then moving again. Stopping. Moving. Whoever was outside was checking the windows. I quietly walked into the bedroom and grabbed the shotgun I keep beside the closet. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the house. Then I heard something else. A scraping sound. Metal touching glass. Someone was trying to pry open a window. Adrenaline surged through my body. I needed to see where he was. But looking out the windows was useless. The rain made everything impossible to see. Then I remembered something. The truck. If I used the headlights, I could light up the entire side of the house. I moved quickly into the garage and climbed into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. The garage door opened slowly. The storm roared outside. As soon as the door lifted high enough, I pulled the truck forward and turned sharply toward the house. Then I flipped on the high beams. The yard exploded in white light. And there he was, standing right beside my bedroom window. A man dressed entirely in black. In his hand was a hammer. For a moment he froze in the headlights. Then he turned and sprinted toward the back of the house. I jumped out of the truck and shouted, "Hey!" But the man was already running across the yard. A second later I heard the engine start. The dirt bike roared to life somewhere behind the barn. By the time I reached the back of the house, the rider was already speeding away into the storm. The sheriff arrived the next morning. They searched the property. That's when they found the backpack. It was hidden near the fence line behind a patch of tall grass. Inside were several items: gloves, tools, zip ties, and the map. The sheriff studied it carefully. Every part of my house was marked. Doors, windows, garage, even the barn. But the most disturbing part was a note written beside the bedroom window. Best entry point. The sheriff looked at me and said something quietly. "Whoever this was, they've been studying your place for a while. They searched the surrounding area but never found the rider. No witnesses, no suspects, nothing. For a few weeks things were quiet again. No bike, no sounds, no signs of anyone nearby. But sometimes late at night, when the wind carries sound across the fields, I hear something in the distance. Faint engine. Far away. Somewhere out in the darkness. And every time I hear it, I wonder if the rider is still out there, waiting for another storm."